Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Christian Horner has had to come out and admit the Red Bull's current situation does not exactly seem to be ending anytime soon. There's not some miracle upgrade package which is going to take them back to where they were at the start of the season. No, they're in a straight dogfight with the other teams around them, and he expects that as well to continue into 2025 and potentially beyond. The theory goes that next year's championship will be absolutely mega, and this year's championship has been pretty mega for the last 7 rounds, but the lead that Red Bull have may well be insurmountable, certainly in the hands of Verstappen. But going into the end of the season and certainly next year, we should be expecting to see many different race winners. Very much on Twitter, your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Couple of rather interesting things on the driver market today. Nikita Mazepin, the return may be on the cards. Now, there's been some rumours about Alpine. We know that they are effectively giving up on their own engine project. They've talked about the fact that their engine isn't great. They are looking to partner with probably Mercedes to buy their engines in 2026 and beyond, although they also said that they're doing so partly for financial reasons. There's a few things going on there. They may also partner with some other team and become their customer team, but Alpine will stay for now, but likely as a customer team in 2026, which is like if you're a works team, but all of a sudden you're buying Mercedes engines, it's not really a works team anymore. Is there really any point you being in the sport? That is the theory, and it's a general feeling that Alpine may well sell up shop effectively over the coming years if this doesn't change. Another possibility is a merger with something like High-Tech, for example. Oliver Oakes, who took over as team boss pretty much this month from Bruno Faman, he former High-Tech founder. So there's been some talk about whether a potential Alpine merger with High-Tech could be on the cards, and if that was to happen, then whether Mazepin might get the drive. I mean, I don't know. It's a long shot rumour, is it? Let's be real. I don't think Mazepin's coming back to Formula 1. In the same way that Sebastian Vettel is not coming back to Formula 1, it was a talking point earlier this season whether Vettel, to Audi or something could be on the cards. Apparently, though, the Vettel Red Bull rumours there at least was some merit to them. Now, as it presently stands, with the decline Red Bull have had, obviously not, but when Red Bull were looking like indomitable at the start of this season, there was potential talk about whether they could bring somebody else in because, if you're Vettel, you might want to come back, win some races with Red Bull, whatever, right? It's difficult for a lot of these guys that have won multiple world championships to actually step away. They say, oh, well, I'm done with the sport now, I'm going to retire, but they never really lose the willing to get back in a Formula 1 car and race it as fast as they possibly can. Like, it's never going to completely disappear. So, Helmut Marko was talking about this and says that, yeah, Vettel was asking about this Red Bull return, but then Marko said this: Sebastian has already been away for 2 years now, and to be honest, Sebastian next to Max in the Red Bull, I didn't want to do that to him. So it's just really funny, kind of saying, like, Vettel is basically saying Vettel's washed, Max is the best driver on the grid, it wasn't going to be pretty, and he's probably right that it wouldn't have been pretty, but still, I thought it was quite the statement to make, to be honest. Elsewhere in the driver market, Ricciardo is eyeing up that Red Bull seat. I still think it's possible. The general theory at the moment goes that Sergio Perez, yes, he's got the extension for the next 2 years. That can be taken away, though, at Red Bull's heart's content. They have, however, kept him on after the summer break. Horner said they look forward to seeing him at tracks that he's raced at well before. That is probably Baku and Singapore, realistically. Monza he's been alright at, maybe. Zandvoort's not been his best, and that's coming up next. So, the next 4 races. After the next 4 races, there's another pretty sizable 3-week break. That may be when, if they are going to pull the trigger this season, that's when they're going to pull the trigger this season, and that's when potentially Daniel Ricciardo could step into the seat, right? So, he's done well, Ricciardo, over the last few rounds. He's stepped it up with respect to Tsunoda. He's probably outperformed him on average over the last 5-6 races or so. And Ricciardo is saying, look, Hamilton's still here, Alonso's still here, they can do it at an older age, no reason why I can't, for example, in that car. Speaking of Alonso, there was talk on the fact that Aston Martin actually have made progress, and for example in Spa, Alonso pulled off a 1-stop and finished P9, which is like, oh, P9, who cares? But Alonso said after the race, like, that's basically as good as a win for Aston right now, which is crazy to think about, but that is just the way that Formula 1 is at the moment. You've got McLaren, you've got Mercedes, you've got Red Bull, you've got Ferrari, and then you've got Aston, pretty much, but that's good enough for P9, P10, and, 3 points on the board if you secure P9, P10. So that's kind of how it is. And Aston, though, are reasonably happy actually about the way things have gone, which is funny to say because they've not even been in the conversation lately as they were at the start of last season. But we know that they shouldn't be too unhappy with the situation because they've actually made some decent steps with their upgrades. It's just, they're just not good enough right now. They're not in the conversation with the top dogs. They'll hope to be in 2026. I think realistically next year, I don't expect them to be too far in the conversation, but maybe Horner could see otherwise, because Horner, as we're going to see in a second, is pretty convinced that Red Bull's current predicament is not going to go away anytime soon. Haas as well, they've made some progress. They're not quite where Aston Martin are, but they're not honestly too far away. And even Kevin Magnussen said he's not going to be in the car next year, but he said this is the first time that their upgrades have ever worked, which is pretty interesting to think about. I don't know what you exactly put this down to. Do you give the credit here to Ayo Komatsu, who of course has taken over this team and talks about the fact that, basically at the start of the season, you guys remember when Komatsu said they're going to be terrible, they're going to be last by miles, and all of a sudden it turned out their car was actually pretty good. Part of it, I think, is Ferrari improving from last year in the stability of their platform, but part of it is clearly the actual technical development of this Haas team. And look, obviously Steiner was around for many years. Komatsu's not really been in the job that long, and the car was already basically made by the time Komatsu took over. But I think you've got to give him some credit at the fact that the upgrade packages they bring actually work, and the car seems to deliver what it's expected to deliver and has been reasonably competitive this season, all things considered. Sauber have not, obviously, and even Bottas says that they've just not been especially stable with the Audi upheaval coming through. So, what next, I suppose, for Bottas in many respects, because the Williams option is now off the cards. They've got Sainz. His only real option is to stay at Sauber alongside Hülkenberg, but that may not happen. There's rumours about Bortoleto or somebody else getting the drive instead. So, it's plausible that Bottas's time in the sport is coming to an end after this season, which I think would be, difficult to justify in some respects. I think he's definitely deserving of a Formula 1 seat still, outside of like the top dogs in the sport, the most accomplished driver in terms of race wins on the grid, and I think gets far less credit at times than he deserves. I mean, you look at what Perez has done in the Red Bull, and then you remember the fact that Bottas made Q3 100 times in a row every single time he was at Mercedes. That's what he did when he had a very dominant car, and even at times it wasn't super dominant during those periods where Bottas was still there on the Saturday, still putting in a good quality week in, week out, and a decent amount of the time was good enough to, win a race if Hamilton wasn't there to win it. So definitely a driver I thought that gets somewhat overlooked, and I'd be very, disappointed if Bottas isn't on the grid next year, and he's been absolutely destroying Zhou as of late. So I feel like they should really keep him, but intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. There was even talk about whether Red Bull, or even if Mercedes, if they need a driver for a year or so, they could look back at Bottas, but I don't think the options, I think, are running relatively slim for Bottas at this point, unfortunately, with only 10 teams on the grid. Williams, of course, they've locked down Sainz and Albon for next year, which is not a bad shout at all, and yeah, rumour has it that they've hired close to 250 staff since Val's appointment, so that's rather impressive, assuming they are good staff. Obviously, Doylton took over their intention to take Williams back to the top of Formula 1 at some point or another, and they're trying to make progress towards that point. Clearly, Sainz sees the vision to some degree as well. But these are the number one point scorers over the last 7 rounds of Formula 1 racing. Verstappen is number 1 with 116, Hamilton with 115, and Piastri with 114. So this sprint win, by the way, is wrong. He won it in Austria, right, rather than in Belgium. But look, whatever. If the championship had started 7 rounds ago, we would have an absolutely banger all-time season, right? But the reality is that Verstappen and Red Bull dominated the first 7 rounds, and we talked about over the last few days exactly why, whether there's anything more to it than initially meets the eye, whatever. If the championship started 7 rounds ago, it would be an all-time classic. But it is pretty good. I mean, the last few rounds have been fantastic racing, very entertaining to see, and this was a graph and a graphic that I was not expecting to see after the way the first few rounds went. It's been well over a year since Perez has won, but only 4 months since Sainz has won, 2 months and a bit since Norris, Leclerc, Verstappen, Russell, Piastri, Hamilton. So quite incredible to think about given the way the season began, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be changing anytime soon, right? Mercedes are bringing their new floor back to the Dutch Grand Prix. They took it off their car, they tried it in Spa, and their car wasn't really working. They decided, okay, we need to make sure we figure this out. Let's go back to the old spec, which is possibly going to be better anyway for Spa, just because it was a Silverstone spec car they had, very similar to the downforce requirements of Spa. That's what they went for. But they're bringing this back to Holland. They think it's going to be the way to go. They obviously have to watch out for the bouncing, which afflicted Ferrari when they tried the same thing, and also with Mercedes, of course. Their car was unstable when they tried this package out in Spa. But there is a feeling from the teams involved in this fight right now that it's absolutely all to play for, right? All the teams are rather strong. Red Bull, it's interesting really because one of their drivers is strong and their team is strong from an operational perspective. But even their strategy, I wouldn't say their strategy's got worse. I think it's the same. It's just when your car is in a difficult position and you're not leading the race by miles, it makes things more challenging to get the strategy correct, to be honest. But still, their strategy, their operations, their pit stops, like Red Bull are nailing that side of things. Their car, though, isn't quite where they need it to be, although Max was still pole by 6/10 in Spa, but a high downforce kind of spec that he was going for the wet conditions on the track. Maybe that played a part. Max at Spa probably played a part as well. But Zach Brown was talking about this and saying, yeah, he's expecting Mercedes to be especially good in the second half of the season, and he's obviously happy that they have a big lead on Mercedes in the constructors. He says Ferrari aren't far behind. I don't think you can rule them out, but Mercedes are on the pace. They've won 3 of the last 4 races. I expect them to be super strong in the second half of the year, and right now it's precisely a 100-point gap that Mercedes have over McLaren, so that seems difficult to overturn. And I wouldn't say it's frustrating, really, but it's just like this season in many ways has been so good. It is a little bit frustrating that, like, we're probably not going to get the championship fights that we really would have liked to see. We're going to get more fights for race wins, which is great because we didn't have that for the last couple of years. So it's great to see that you can tune into an F1 weekend and not know who's going to win. But given the way the season started, Max is going to win the drivers. I mean, his lead is realistically too great for Lando to overcome. Lando would have to gain at least like 8 points per round for the rest of the season, which is possible if Lando wins all the races. But, you know, on recent evidence, Lando isn't winning the races even when they had the fastest car. And now it's like, well, Mercedes are kind of like pretty much there as well. So it just is probably too tall of an order. But at least we're going to get some great racing. It's just whether, you know, the championship fight isn't really there as it stands. But of course, in theory, it might be there for next year, right? And this is the main talking point at the moment that, okay, this year, probably Max wins the drivers, probably McLaren still win the constructors anyway. But next season, what sort of championship fight are we going to have on our hands? Because what's ever happened to Red Bull over the last few months, Christian Horner is not saying, oh, well, you know, we've just taken a bit of a wrong turn here. We're going to resolve the problem and we're going to be back to where they were last year, next year. But that's not really going to be the case, to our understanding. This was the year that if Red Bull were going to capitalise on the fact that they had an unbelievably dominant car last year, they could start very early on this year's developments. This was the year to capitalise on that. They seemingly did that. Now the other guys have caught up, or Red Bull have slowed down, whatever you want to believe. It's probably a bit of both, to be honest, based on the evidence that we saw over the last few days. And there's still some elements of Red Bull there. Paul Monahan's still there, but they are losing people, and Red Bull's upgrades aren't really working as they planned. There's talk about the fact that, well, their correlation isn't so good anymore, and there's been some problems. Obviously, they've got their own engine department for 2026, which is questionable whether that's going to really work out in their favour. But Horner's not even thinking about that yet. He's mainly thinking about 2025. Because in 2022, Red Bull won both championships. 23, they won both championships. 24, they're probably going to win one of the 2 championships. 2025, what about that? Is it 0 of the 2 championships? What is the trend going to be? Because Horner just straight up says, look, he says it's great for the sports, right? Because of course he's going to say that, oh yeah, great competitions, all good. Of course he would love to be dominating again, which he was, and he can have the smug grin on his face, which all the team principals have, but Horner especially when they win all the time. And look, obviously Horner's talking about the fact that, yeah, good for the sport, you get this natural convergence of the teams, which was always going to happen to some degree. I just didn't think it would happen to this level where, with the exception of like Ferrari, really, like Ferrari at the moment can get a podium, but it doesn't seem like they're quick enough to get a win. Whereas any of the other teams, Max, Max is the only one getting a win out of Red Bull, either of the McLarens, either of the Mercedes, they can win right now on any given weekends. And I think, you know, Leclerc and Sainz can be there in the ballpark as well. Maybe a safety car intervention, and the Ferrari could win one of these Grand Prix. Now he says, look, big regulation change in 26, that will cause some divergence, but between now and then, I think it's going to be, for the next 18 months, flat out between the 4 teams. So Horner effectively admitting here that, yeah, it's not like Red Bull have something crazy in the works that's going to take them back to the top and they've got a big upgrade coming and, oh, don't worry about it, guys, we are still ahead of the competition. It's merely that they've just caught up for now and we're going to be streaking ahead again when the time comes. That's not the case, right? And Horner says, yeah, he thinks it's going to be a straight fight between all of those 4 teams I mentioned for the next 18 months. So, I hope the Horner's prediction here is correct. We've seen Red Bull talk about this before and say, oh, well, we're not as good as we once were. The dominance is ending. Whatever. Never really believe it. On this occasion, though, you've got to say the evidence points towards this, and there is good evidence to suggest that Verstappen and all the other top drivers in the top cars will be in a straight fight. Who wins the championship next season? That right now, I guess, is the big question, because as I say, operationally, strategically, and from like a pure driver perspective, Red Bull have the best driver right now in Formula 1 in Max Verstappen. Like the form, the consistency, the pace is still out of control. Obviously, the strategy, the operations are good, but they don't necessarily have the car. So is Max going to be favoured for next year's championship? I think it depends really how this season ends. There's a good argument to say that, Piastri or Norris in the McLaren will be a real top favourite for next year's championship, or Russell in the Mercedes. Or if Max goes to Mercedes, is he going to be the championship favourite there? I don't know. Hamilton in the Ferrari, you would think would be in the conversation, but who knows how good Ferrari are going to be? That's the question as it stands. So fascinated to hear your thoughts in the comment section below, and also just early predictions, who wins next year's championship, because a few months ago I'd have said, I might not even tune in to watch the races anymore. Verstappen's going to win everything for the next couple of years. What's even the point? Now it's a very different story, and I don't know who next year's championship favourite is. But, I think if I had to put my money on anyone, it would probably be on someone who's consistently shown they can get the job done. I'd probably still say Max, to be honest. I'd probably still say Max. But, I don't know. Could be anyone. If Hamilton was staying at Mercedes, I actually might say Hamilton, but just because the Ferrari thing is a bit of a question mark, and I don't really trust Russell over the course of a season in the same way that I can't really trust Norris over the course of a season to beat Max. I think next year for Max might be, because this year I think he'll hold on. Next year for Max maybe more like, okay, it's just about trying to find a way to beat Max over the course of a championship rather than anything spectacular, because, beating him in a race is hard enough. Beating him over a championship is, another challenge entirely. But very much interested your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.